Welcome to Champion Stepdad Podcast. We are exploring the unique role of stepdads and how to apply performance psychology skills to become better father figures and role models. Building a band of brothers by focusing on empathy and accountability. Empathy because being a stepdad is tough. Accountability because I get it, being a stepdad is tough, but you chose this role, so do it as best you can. My name is Neil Wadier. In addition to being a stepdad, I'm also a resilience trainer and a performance consultant, encouraging you to join the Champion Stepdad Facebook group, get involved, and grow your band of brothers. We are working our way through the 7 C's of resilience. We've already talked about confidence, competence, connection, character, and contribution. In this 6th episode of the series, we are talking about coping. Coping is your ability to deal with and attempt to overcome problems or difficulties. They are strategies used during stress, adversity, or trauma. They may help manage painful or difficult emotions, help you adjust to stressful events, and help you maintain emotional well-being. Now, before I get into this episode, I want to give you a fair warning. I spent a lot more time researching this episode than I had on some of the previous ones, and this is a longer episode. It contains much more detail than the previous episodes in the series. And the reason why is coping is the how. It is how do you have more emotional well-being? How do you regulate emotion? How do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with emotional triggers or past trauma that keeps popping up? This is the context of resilience, and the context of your circumstances matter. Methods of coping can be helpful in some situations, while unhelpful and possibly even hurtful in other situations. So that's why it's important to have a good understanding of available coping mechanisms, along with how and when to most appropriately use them. Later in the episode, I will get into some detail about coping strategies and defense mechanisms. If you're not in the mindset or you don't have time, the emotional, either mental capacity or even the time to really listen to all the details, or you're otherwise preoccupied and you can't spare the dedicated attention, I recommend just listen through for the general overall information that I'm going to provide, and then come back and listen again later when you have time or when you want to listen to more of the detail and dig into the details that I provide. Because I do go into some detail, but I think it's very relevant. I think it's very important to talk about the different coping mechanisms, coping strategies and defense mechanisms. Everyone faces stress, adversity, and trauma to certain degrees, but they look different for everyone because they can be experienced in many ways. And therefore, there are many ways to face and overcome stress, adversity, and trauma. However, I don't believe the classic phrase, "what doesn't kill me makes me stronger." This approach assumes because you make it through, you'll be fine, but don't believe it. You have to be more critical and willing to learn from these circumstances in order to grow through them. Your willingness to be self-critical and keep focus on the constant pursuit of improvement is what will help you grow and thrive through stress, adversity, and trauma. Your brain pulls in more data than you can consciously process, store, and recall effectively. As a response, your brain creates habits in your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Think of a time when you were driving your vehicle and realized for the last few minutes or more, you've been on autopilot, cruising along without much thought, likely on a long stretch of highway or on a road that you travel very often. You may not realize everything that you are thinking, feeling, and doing, but your brain is taking note. Your brain's job is to help you focus on the most important details and bypass other insignificant data by turning on autopilot in those areas. This can be both productive and counterproductive. I'm a big Adam Sandler fan. I love his comedy and I love his movies. And one of his movies called Click is a great example of this. Adam Sandler's character comes across a remote control, which helps manage his life. But he finds out later in the movie that the remote control can learn based on his preferences. And the remote control can then take action for him without his input. And this is what's happening to you right now. Every thought, emotion, and behavior is being tracked by your brain. Every thought, emotion, and behavior creates a habit and reinforces future unconscious thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. That is why I preach self-awareness so much. If you do not understand who you are, meaning your morals, values, and beliefs, who you are and what you stand for, your environment will force your mind to take action, will force your mind to make decisions. And often without your conscious awareness, you are very likely to fall back on old, well-worn habits. Those habits can be either productive or counterproductive. Everything that you've done up until this point in your life, all your education and experience, has created habits of your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Many of your subconscious defense mechanisms are the result of your past behaviors. It's your autopilot. Everyone has emotional triggers. I know a lot of guys hate that term, but we all have them. Stressful events can induce regression or relapse into inferior defense styles and coping, things that are unhelpful, but you've done them so many times, that's just what you resort to when you're facing stress and adversity. And remember, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of training. Without self-awareness and deliberately learning and training new mental skills, you are very likely to fall back on those old habits. You have to learn and understand, own and change them if they're counterproductive, or they'll continue to own you. Don't be a victim. Don't be a victim of circumstance, and don't be a victim of your ego. What do you do well? You have to know what you do well, what it is that you do, and what is the result. If you're doing well in those things, then keep doing it and reinforce those behaviors. Where are you struggling? What thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, which actions are causing you problems? Work it backward and identify the behaviors, the emotions, the thoughts, the beliefs, the values, the morals. Become more self-aware. Who are you? What do you believe in? What are the thoughts that are a result of your past experiences or your beliefs? Are they productive or are they counterproductive? Really get to know yourself and understand why it is that you do what you do. So back to coping. Coping mechanisms are often related to defense mechanisms, but there's important differences between the two. The traditional view within psychology is defense mechanisms are patterns of relatively involuntary responses, subconscious, that involve your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Unconscious processing that is strongly related to how you thought, felt, or behaved in the past. Coping mechanisms are conscious and purposeful processes based on logic and reason. They are the mental skills that require practice and reinforcement. So defense mechanisms, primarily subconscious, based on what you've done in the past. Coping mechanisms, conscious, purposeful, you have trained and now possibly could be part of your defense mechanisms, but you have to learn them and train them. So difference between defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms. Now, some of my research on this topic comes from a 10-author research article that was published in 2020, and where they observed psychiatry trainees in Romania. These authors agreed with my earlier statement that coping and defense mechanisms can be productive or counterproductive. Counterproductive coping can be linked to depression, anxiety, and personality disorders. A specific example that I I read about it is called avoidant coping, where a person changes their behaviors so they can avoid thinking about, feeling, or doing difficult things, such as conflict avoidance at work or within a relationship. You avoid conflict, you change your behavior, you change your thinking, so you just don't even deal with it. This counterproductive behavior pattern can result in increased future symptoms rather than the escape that people are really looking for. So I'm going to avoid dealing with this problem, actually ends up causing more problems down the road because those problems multiply. The conflict continues to escalate, or the feelings associated with conflict can cause internal distress because it's building up inside of you instead of being addressed, resolved, and released. Now, before I get into specific coping strategies and defense mechanisms, I want to talk specifically about emotions. In my resilience workshops, I present an activity to demonstrate how labeling emotions as positive or negative is unhelpful. So positive emotions versus negative emotions. Any emotion you feel is valid. Happy, sad, mad, frustrated, excited. If you feel it, own it and process it for a productive outcome. If you feel mad, don't just suppress the feeling of being mad. There are times where it's appropriate to suppress it for a short period of time, but I'm talking about over the long term. Eventually, if you feel that emotion, you need to process it so that you can eventually let it go. But you can't just suppress something and expect it not to be there anymore. Labeling mad, as an example, labeling mad as a negative emotion is unhelpful because it leads to the desire to suppress. If you feel mad, there's a reason why, and you need to understand why you feel mad. So you can either address the situation or you can address your own internal thoughts, beliefs, morals, values, whatever it is that's causing you to be mad. Now, think of a time when someone wronged you. You may have every right to be upset. The productive outcome results from when you understand why you are mad and either address the issue or determine it's legitimate. It's legitimately not worth your time. So did something happen where you need to address the conflict because somebody's legitimately making you mad? Or, for example, driving in traffic. Is it really worth your time? Or is it one of those where you need to change your thoughts and your behaviors that, you know what, traffic is traffic. Yeah, that guy or that lady might have been a jerk. There's no reason for you to speed up and mess with them in traffic. Like, let it go, dude. It's traffic is traffic. It's frustrating. I get it. You have to find a way to deal with it because it's not going away. You got to figure out how to deal with it. Now, similar, if you've experienced loss, it's okay to be sad for a while. Allowing yourself to feel your feelings will help you effectively process them and eventually let them go so that you can move on. Now, going back to this Romanian study, it references 4 coping strategies and 30 defense mechanisms. And the defense mechanisms were categorized into 7 levels. And this is where I gave you that fair warning earlier. I'm going to get into a little bit of detail. I'm not going to go into deep dive into any one of them, but I do want you to know what they are so you can be aware. You might be able to identify with one and say, oh yeah, I do that. I've recognized some of my behaviors and my patterns of thoughts and emotions by going through resilience training. And I'm like, oh yeah, that is something that I do. And it really is counterproductive. So I've experienced a lot of self-awareness and growth by being able to identify some of the things that I do. So taking our time, we're going to walk through these coping strategies and defense mechanisms. I get it. This is not the most exciting information, but it is extremely valuable. So 4 coping strategies. The 4 coping strategies they talk about are emotion-focused, problem-focused, social support, and avoidant coping. Emotion-focused coping is reducing counterproductive emotional responses that are associated with stress. It's distracting yourself for short-term relief. It's beneficial because you can focus on the situation without the elevated emotion and associated physical response. For example, a baseball pitcher. Let's say a baseball pitcher is in the heat of a game and it's tied, or maybe it's a close score and they let a home run go, or they give up a hit and put runners in scoring position. A baseball pitcher, I've never been a baseball pitcher, but you can imagine how difficult it must be to give up a hit that puts your team in a difficult situation. And you have about 10 seconds to get your shit straight before the next pitch is about to happen. Right? Because you can only take so many timeouts. The manager can only come to the mound so many times before you actually have to leave the game. So if you're going to keep yourself straight, you have to be able to give yourself that emotion focused, reducing that emotional reaction so you can focus on what's most important in the moment. A lot of people like to refer to this as mindfulness in sports psychology. Another example is my wife. She's a paramedic. She works in an ER. She a lot of times has to focus on the moment, and she'll have to process her emotions later. A lot of people might talk about meditation or prayer. Journaling is very productive. There's a term called cognitive reappraisal. Essentially, this is reframing or reinterpreting the meaning of a situation. Like the example I gave of, you get frustrated or angry in traffic. You have to be able to down-regulate your emotions so that you can refocus your attention. Does it really do any good to get upset and road rage? No, we all know that. But even the best of us get frustrated in traffic. There are some emotion-focused coping strategies, such as drugs and alcohol, where they're changing your emotional state. Again, I'm not going to say don't go have a beer or whatever it is that you like to smoke. I'm not going to tell you not to do that. What I'm going to say is that's not a coping strategy. It's not a coping strategy. So beware of those things. So that's emotion-focused coping. Next is problem-focused coping. These are proactive efforts to manage stressful situations and either modify or eliminate the source of stress through individual behavior. This could be asking for support from a professional, like going to counseling or therapy. This could be time management, managing your time better so that you don't feel so much stress. You don't feel so crazy, right? Create a to-do list, set your priorities, focus your attention, and it helps you feel a sense of accomplishment. You're better organized. It also could look like establishing healthy boundaries, but ensure that you're not just employing conflict avoidance, right? This is where the self-awareness comes from. There's a difference between setting healthy boundaries and avoiding conflict, right? Establishing healthy boundaries is healthy and productive. Conflict avoidance is unhealthy and counterproductive. And might be some times that you just need to walk away. You just need a break. It could be with you and your spouse. You're having an argument. You know what? I just need 5 minutes. I just need 10 minutes. But remember, the productive coping strategy of it is then setting a time to come back with the goal of a productive resolution of the conflict. It's not to go outside and piss and moan and build it up even more. And what am I going to say this time? Oh, I got to say that. That'll get to her. No, you can't do that. That's counterproductive. So we talked about emotion-focused coping, problem-focused coping. Then there's also social support coping, support received through a social network. This could be instrumental support, like in the short term, I need money, food, or a ride because my car's broke down, right? Tangible physical assistance. It could also be social emotional support, which is things like listening or feeling heard by other people. Determining thoughtful, responsible decisions associated with other people in your life. Social supports can also be expressions of feelings. Talking through what you feel and why is important. Sometimes you just got to talk it out. Lack of social support can lead to feelings of isolation and loneliness, which can increase counterproductive emotional responses, which can lead to things like drugs and alcohol, because I don't have any other release, or I don't feel comfortable talking to anybody, so I'm just going to go blast out a 6-pack or something like that. Not productive, not productive. Social support is extremely important. And then the final coping strategy is avoidant coping. Clearly counterproductive, right? We're talking about denial. We're talking about mental and behavioral deactivation, shutting down or alienating other people, conflict avoidance, very unhealthy behaviors. Now, out of the 4 of these, we talked about emotion-focused coping, problem-focused coping, social support coping, and avoidant coping. Problem-focused coping style has been associated with positive emotional well-being. It is the recommended as the best option. Now, and that's saying, generally speaking. Again, there are other times where emotion-focused coping would give you the outcome that you're looking for. But typically speaking, problem-focused coping style has been associated with positive emotional well-being, while emotion-based coping could also be a factor in emotional strain of a person. If you're not expressing your emotions and looking for positive resolution and looking for the processing of those emotions, if you're not doing it properly, it can actually cause you more emotional strain. Now, the usefulness and the value of coping depends on the type of coping strategy used and additional personal and environmental factors. So again, other than avoidant coping, the other 3, social support coping, problem-focused coping, and emotion-focused coping, can be appropriate at any particular time. It just depends on the circumstances involved. Now, although problem-focused coping is reported to be superior to emotion-focused coping, they are often used together in the same process, if in different degrees. So it's not just a which one do I use? It could be a combination of. It could be problem-focused coping with my social network. So really think about those type of coping mechanisms. Remember, coping mechanisms are your conscious, deliberate attempts to work through stress, adversity, and trauma. Now, getting into defense mechanisms, 7 levels of defense mechanism, and each one has several examples within. So defense mechanisms, typically subconscious, unconscious processing that you're doing, may be productive or counterproductive. So the first level of defense mechanism is action. This could be rejecting help. This could be complaining. You could be acting out. It could look like passive aggressive behavior. Defense mechanism, acting out something. The second one that was talked about, actually, the number 2, number 3 are very similar. We're talking about image distortion. The first one is major image distortion. The second one is minor image distortion. Very, very similar. It's just a matter of to what degree you do them. Major image distortion is oversimplifying yourself or another person with absolutes, such as good and bad, powerful, weak, worthy and unworthy. Extreme examples of, oh, that person's such a dirtbag, or to self, I'm so unworthy of love. All right. Whether you're actually saying that to yourself or you don't realize you're saying that to yourself, it is an absolute and is really soul crushing. At the same time, judging other people by absolutes and putting yourself on a pedestal doesn't do any good, because where's the self-reflection of you simply saying, oh, I'm so awesome, right? Like there's no real work being done there, right? A lot of times people talk about major image distortion. They're projecting representations liberally. A lot of times you'll see this in body image, whether it be somebody talking about, I'm so fat and now I've got, eating disorders, something like that. The real serious examples can be body image or eating disorders. And that can go the other way too. Going to the gym and being obsessed with going to the gym and looking a certain way, getting that 6-pack or having those huge biceps or having, whatever weight press that you're looking for, that can be just as counterproductive. Going to the gym, it can be a good coping mechanism, but it's not a solution, and it can lead to its own set of problems as well. Minor image distortion now is instead of absolutes, it's exaggeration of positive or negative qualities. You could devalue yourself or others. You can idealize someone else or idealize yourself. And we're talking about omnipotence, like acting superior to others, where the major is an absolute, the minor is an exaggeration of pretending to possess special powers or abilities that make you so much better than anybody else, or devaluing yourself because you feel insecure or lesser. You see this a lot where, people, it's not just a matter of their character, it's maybe their abilities. Like, I feel like I'm a good person, but maybe I'm just not worthy of this role, or I'm just not going to be able to achieve that. Those are where you get into that image distortion. So we had counterproductive actions. You have major and minor image distortion. Next is refusal to take responsibility, justification and rationalization of events, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Justification and rationalization is the key here. You are manipulating. You're projecting, you're denying, you're shifting blame. So the key here, justification and rationalization of your thoughts, actions, or words. Fifth is neurotic. Neurotic is thrown around a lot. and it's something that this actually I get clarified when I was doing the research, clarified because I didn't really have a clear understanding of what neurotic means. Somebody who is neurotic sees everyday situations as far worse than they really are. It's kind of that lean to, the extremes of, they experience extreme pessimism or negativity. It's the irrational displacement of thoughts and feelings. Abused children can feel anxious because of their abuse, but they're not capable of seeing the relationship between their anxiety and their abuse. And I say children, but this could be, an adult. This could be a guy, it could be you or a guy that's in a relationship that's highly abusive. And not every relationship is a physical abuse. There can be mental and emotional, financial abuse, where they're having, somebody might experience depression or anxiety, or have some self-doubts about themselves that are resulting from this abuse that they're feeling, but they don't see the connection between the two, right? In addition to the irrational displacement of thoughts and feelings, you have disassociation. This is removal of self from the event. A lot of times people talk about blocking trauma. Long-term, it can result in dissociative disorder, which is where someone experiences a disconnection and lack of continuity between their thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions, and identity. So past trauma is blocked, and they may not even remember that it happened. This can cause really significant problems in the present or in the future, because this person is disconnected in order to escape reality. Displacement is also part of the neuroticism. Displacement is redirecting unpleasant emotions or impulses towards another person or an object. You might be angry at your boss, but you're going to shout at your spouse and your children instead. It's displacement. Finally is repression. Repression is involuntary pushing an unpleasant or unacceptable feeling or thought out from your consciousness. Again, abuse victims may repress their memories. It can be harder to access later on down the road. The thoughts, emotions, behaviors may be connected, right? So they haven't displaced or disassociated. The thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are still there and connected, but they're misunderstood. Okay, so that is neurotic. So we're getting there. We got two more. Next one is obsessive. Obsessive is your attempt to isolate effect or impact. You screen out painful feelings by recalling traumatic event without experiencing the associated emotion. For example, if a married person is infatuated with another person besides their spouse, they may, instead of cheating, become even more obsessed and preoccupied with showing their spouse signs of love and affection. Now, ultimately, this could backfire because while they are trying that much harder to be madly in love and show all this affection, there could still be these thoughts and emotions in the back of their mind that can pop out later. Another part of being obsessive is intellectualization. This is overusing reasoning to block confrontation with unconscious conflict and the emotional stress. Thinking is used to avoid feeling. And then final part of obsessive is undoing. Undoing is when you cancel out or remove an unhealthy, destructive, or otherwise threatening thought or action by engaging in the contrary behavior. For example, after thinking about being violent with someone, you become overly nice or begin to accommodate them. And this is similar to the isolation of affect, where you're basically trying to undo an emotion. So again, you're not processing emotions effectively. You're just trying to shut them out or just change them, right? You're ignoring the emotion. You're not effectively processing them. Okay, so then the final defense mechanism is adaptive. The first part of adaptive I wanted to hit on is sublimation. Sublimation. Can't say the word. This is where you channel unwanted or unacceptable urges into an admissible or productive outlet, such as exercise or home improvement project. But again, remember, this can be productive or counterproductive, because we talked about going to the gym can be productive, but it can also be counterproductive. So you sublimate these unwanted or unacceptable urges, and you end up just doing something else that could be just as unhealthy. So again, defense mechanism is typically subconscious. So these are the actions that you're taking and you don't necessarily realize you're doing them. Suppression is intentionally putting distressful thoughts or emotions out of your conscious awareness until there is an opportunity to cope adaptively. Generally, this is a good thing. I use the example of my wife working in an ER. A lot of times she her and other high-risk professions, surgeons, paramedics, law enforcement, firefighters, military, see a lot of horrible things. They could see, especially working in an ER. There's times where Cindy has come home a couple days in a row and talked about, yeah, we lost 2 people today. She used official terms. They coded or whatever it is that they use, really smart medical people things. But yeah, she saw 2 people die last night. I'm like, holy shit, dude. Like, do you need to talk? And she's like, yeah, maybe later. I just don't want to talk about it right now. Right. So she has to be careful that she's not just suppressing and getting rid of it. Eventually she's going to have to talk about these things, whether it's to me, her sister, a therapist. Suppress until you can cope adaptively. Again, subconscious, you got to bring these things into awareness. Self-assertion is expressing feelings and thoughts directly. Being careful that it's not aggressive, coercive, or manipulative. You are expressing your feelings and your thoughts directly to the person or people that have directly affected you, right? And then in return, you're listening empathically. You're listening with empathy to try to get to that resolution, that effective resolution. Another part, another adaptive defense mechanism is self-assertion, expressing your feelings. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the one I just talked about. Self-assertion is expressing feelings and thoughts directly. Self-observation is reflecting on your thoughts, feelings, motivation, and behavior, and attempting to respond productively. Journaling is a really good example of this. Just you could write on some random notepad. You could write in a dedicated journal. I've done this sometimes where I'll put on like Google Docs, or on my MacBook has dictation, where I'll turn on the dictation and I'll just start talking into my microphone. and I'll go back and read it later, and a lot of it's just jumbled nonsense, but it's me reflecting on not only what happened, but how I felt about it, what I thought about it, what was my motivation behind it, what was my motivation behind the resolution, how did I act before, during, and after. So self-observation. Getting there, a couple more. Humor. Humor is your attempt to defend against painful material. It can be a distraction device used to change a topic. You could use it to show the comical absurdity of what's actually happening right now. It can be an outlet in high anxiety situations. It can be productive and it can be detrimental. Use it wisely. Some people, that's their default. Other people, they just try to throw in humor, like, oh, this is a little uncomfortable. Let's try to, then they try to say something funny. I've seen it backfire just as much as I've seen it be successful. Anticipation. This is pleasure or anxiety in considering or awaiting an expected event. You are mentally preparing for something. You're rehearsing possible outcomes. And it's helpful to overcome phobias. This is something I work with people on, preparing for performing arts. I worked with a guitarist in a band who was really, really good. And you would never know he had performance anxiety because he just went out there and rocked it, man. It was so awesome. But he came to me and he's like, yeah, man, I'm a wreck. Like 20 minutes before I go on stage, I'm a wreck. And I'm like, how do you get through that? And he's like, you just take a couple shots. And I'm like, okay, I got it. Like, that's, I see where you're going with this, but let's work on some more effective ways to work through your performance anxiety so that you can be that much more productive. Altruism, acts of goodwill towards another person. As a defense mechanism, we're talking about being particularly helpful to a person who you might feel dislikes you. It could also be neutralizing an argument with kind words and positivity. So again, these are good things that some people just do naturally. It could be their default mechanism of, this person doesn't like you. Okay, well, let me try to figure out a way to connect with this person. I've used this before with somebody that I didn't necessarily dislike, but they just kind of annoyed me, right? Well, I found one thing that we had in common. I like to golf. This person is obsessed with golfing. So I just ask them a couple questions. Hey, where's the last time you played? Or where do you like to play? Or what's the coolest place you played? Or, what was the coolest shot you've had in the last couple of weeks? And suddenly it was just one thing that we connected on. And he was just a little bit less annoying. And he seemed to ease up what the things that were driving me crazy about him. It took my mind off of them, but it seemed to take his mind off of some of the things that were causing conflict between the two of us. And then finally, the last topic on adaptive coping is affiliation. This is turning to others for help or support. And remember, we did talk about the social aspect of coping is within your awareness. Affiliation is that tendency to turn to others without necessarily realizing that that's what you're doing. This is your ability to express yourself, confide your problems, feel less alone or isolated. You seek validation and support. Alcoholics Anonymous is a really good example of this. People that go in there and it's shared pain. They understand what each other has been through to a certain extent. You feel that community, that affiliation, and you not only feel welcome into an organization, but you feel supported, and they have their own ways of helping you through your own struggles. A lot of times without judgment, because even, people that go to Alcoholics Anonymous, they have their step backs. They have their bad days. I had a friend of ours that's been an alcoholic, has been in AA for years. And then had a I don't know if you can call it a relapse or just a bad couple weeks. And, they were drinking pretty heavy. They went back to AA and they started all over again and ended up getting whatever it is, their medallion or whatever it is, for a month sober. It was a great step back towards her goal. But there was no real judgment associated. It was just, okay, great. You had a bad couple weeks. You're back. Let's knock this thing out. And it was that affiliation that she just went back to. And didn't even have to really think about it. She just woke up one day and she's like, man, this sucks. I got to go back. And so she did. Now, all of these defense mechanisms adaptive defense mechanisms. So specifically adaptive defense mechanisms, the last grouping of those that I talked about: affiliation, altruism, anticipation, humor, self-observation, self-assertion, suppression, and sublimation. The adaptive defense mechanisms imply coping focused on the problem, right? You're focused on the emotion, or you're trying to seek social support. The adaptive defense mechanisms are the things where if you deliberately practice a coping mechanism, that ends up, the more you practice it, the better you get at it, right? So that ends up becoming your defense mechanism in a productive way. So you're now creating productive habits that are just your go-to. I understand that this is a lot of information, and if you just listen to me go on and on about these things, I hope you just picked out a couple things and just understand ultimately what I want you to take from the idea of coping is there's positive and negative. There's healthy and unhealthy. There's productive and there's unproductive. I saw a post today. I follow the Tampa Bay Rays mental performance coach on social media, and he posted a really interesting message on social media. It said, option A, small good habits. Option B, small bad habits. Consistently executed over time, both will produce noticeable results. The choice is yours. So really it comes down to, you need to be more deliberate with your self-awareness and then developing your skills. No different than you ever did in a sport or a trade or a business or whatever, where anything that required training and practice of specific skills in order to be better at something, right? It sounds a lot like being a stepdad, being in a relationship. I want to be more deliberate about my development so that I don't necessarily have to think about these things anymore. I just naturally I naturally fall back on the good habit because that's the one that I've practiced so often. So be really proactive with your self-awareness, be proactive with your development so that both your coping strategies and your defense mechanisms are mostly healthy, productive, and positive. Now, if you're still listening, I thank you, and I hope this episode helped you better understand the productive and counterproductive nature of coping and helped you understand the difference between coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms. Although defense mechanisms tend to be unconscious, they can be learned and unlearned by becoming more self-aware, understanding your unconscious tendencies, then learning new mechanisms and reinforcing productive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Thank you for listening to the Champion Stepdad podcast. I have 2 tasks for you to take this week. First, choose one action from today's conversation to implement in your life. Second, share this podcast and community with somebody who wants to be a better stepdad. I appreciate your direct message feedback and would appreciate your online review of the podcast. Your honest rating and review helps me improve the show and helps others find our community. Thanks and have a great week.